the recording. My name is Savannah Skierbiers, and I am the European Democracy Coordinator at the European Citizen Action Service, which is one of the 12 partner organizations in the Bolster Consortium, which is led by Tilburg University. For those of you who may be new to Bolster, the project's full name is Bridging Organizations and Marginalized Communities for Local Sustainability Transitions in Europe, as you see on the screen. It is funded by the European Union's Horizon Europe program, and our goal is to explore how marginalized communities and vulnerable groups are impacted by the European Green Deal policies, and also assess how involving them in this decision-making process can increase support for sustainability transitions. So as a part of this effort, ECAS and the consortium are hosting a series of 10 online regional policy dialogues, each focusing on one of the regions undergoing the just transition processes. Through these dialogues, we aim to foster cross-regional comparisons by sharing lessons learned from regions across Europe that are grappling with green transitions. So, to start things off, we have a couple of quick icebreaker questions just to get people in the mood and to get people coming into the event, thank you. Using the Slido questionnaire, you can either scan the QR code or you can go on the slido.com and put in the information. The login is #bolster6 and the password is on the screen. And so the quick icebreaker questions, we would love to know where you are joining us from. So please let us know your city or your region that you're tuning in from. And then for the second question, which once you've answered the first question, you will see on your screen as well, how familiar are you with the topic of just transition in the EU? So these answers will really help us get a sense of how knowledgeable our audience is here today and also to get to know each other a little bit more. I'll give a few minutes for everyone to answer.
Maybe we can scroll to the next slide so people can actually,
So we see a lot of people tuning in from Romania, but also Bulgaria, the Netherlands, Croatia, which also are our partner countries. And for there to be so many people from Romania today makes a lot of sense because actually today's dialogue will focus on how the just transition mechanism can address energy poverty and importantly, how communities can become more engaged in participatory processes within these transitions. And we will spotlight the Prahova region in Romania. So maybe we can move on to the second. Yes, perfect. So we see that many people already have a solid background or some basic knowledge about the just transition mechanism in the EU, which is really great. But no worries, some of our speakers will also get into this in a bit more detail. And in a similar fashion, we have, besides the presentations today in our agenda, we also have a panel discussion, which will also be guided by some questions that we have shared in advance. So using the same mechanism of Slido, if you haven't done so already, you can complete the questionnaire via Slido, which has the questions that will guide the discussion. So you can connect using the same credentials, so you should be able to answer now. And you're also welcome to edit or add new responses as we go through the event. And you can also edit your responses after you hit send. So Thank you, everyone, for engaging me with the Slido and the little icebreaker. It's really great to see such a diverse group of participants today. So without further delay, I'm pleased to hand the floor to our first presenter, Alexandra Lulace from Make Better Romania, who will provide a short presentation on the regional research work on Bolster has conducted in Romania.
Thanks, Savannah. Do you have my presentation or should I?
No, we have your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so yes, I'm Alexandra. I'm part of the Bolster Consortium and we're carrying out the research on the just transition in Prahova, Romania. I will try to keep my presentation short, particularly since my aim is less about giving answers and more about opening up some questions to the group. In our field work, we stumbled upon some dilemmas that I hope we can understand better in dialogue with all of the experts invited here today. Just a short overview of Bolster. So from the objectives of the Just Transition mechanism, we are focusing on the part of leaving no one behind and how that was operationalized in the EU. So our aim was to understand how marginalized communities understand and are affected by Green Deal policies, and also to test how this process can be made more inclusive and just. If you can move on to the next slide. Thanks. As a part of this process, we met with regional and national stakeholders. We monitored how the Just Transition Plan was elaborated in Prahova and also implemented at the local level. But we also met with groups that are either experiencing or are at risk of experiencing marginalization. With these groups, we formed three kind of community action groups in three different cities. And with them, we tested some more participatory processes that maybe would connect their needs to the JT policies. If we can move on to the next slide. I'll try not to, talk a lot about Bolster and more about what really kind of concerns us today. For who is not familiarized with the Prahova region, just a bit of context. Prahova is the hotspot of Romanian oil and gas. And for a period in history, it was also a global leader in the field. So the industry is old, it has a lot of heritage. In parallel, Prahova has a very weak and underdeveloped civic sector. There are not a lot of NGOs, and these NGOs don't have let's say, a big political scope. It's also marked by very low trust in public authorities. And in the Just Transition kind of planning process, they have kept this whole process pretty behind closed doors, quite untransparent, and open to a very small diversity of stakeholders. There is this, let's say, background of distrust. Overall, Prahova, much like all Romanian post-industrial areas, did suffer a decline, particularly in the 90s and noughties. It led to a demographic decline and divestment from public services and goods. But overall, it is still one of the richer regions in the country. And it makes ample use of its connection to Bucharest. It has, in terms of exchange with economic flows, unemployment is lower than average. The economy is quite diversified. So it is a strong region. Yes, if you can move on. Thanks. Okay, so what I'd really like us to talk about today is about this fracture between, let's say, the aims of the Just Transition as they're formulated at the EU level and the realities on the ground, and how the Just Transition mechanism could act as a bridge between these two. But yeah, where do these fractures come about? I mentioned that we're working with three groups, youth group, kind of mixed citizens group, and also women's group in Mimiu, in Ploiești. And this will be our case study today. So Mimiu is an informal settlement located next to the remnants of the former Astra petrol refinery. And it has very reduced access to basic utilities like formal heating, water, sewage. It has very high energy poverty, and a lot of the residents can't formally access things like heating aid. The heating is dangerous, expensive, and polluting. They're mostly firewood stoves, which, I mean, apart from the high risk of fire, the fire hazard, they're also much more polluting and, yeah, expensive for families. The homes in the informal settlement are kind of built with a mix of improvised or proper materials, but they're mostly built in a patchwork way, upgraded on the long term. So they're very like energy inefficient. They lose a lot of heat in winter. They don't keep cool in the summer, and people can't really escape those homes, especially mothers and children. This is where they spend most of their time. The other, let's say, resources of the city, they're kind of locked out of them. So they will spend most of their time in these conditions. These are marginalized areas, so also marked by informal and precarious employment. What I'd like to mention is that the situation is not unique to Prahova or to Ploiești, for that matter, which is the county capital. These zones of exclusion are quite common in former industrial areas, and they do have direct experience with environmental injustice. Now, in theory, these issues would be very relevant to the aims of the just transition and its objectives, which is to enable regions and citizens to face social, employment, economic, and environmental effects of the transition required to meet climate and energy targets. Can we move on to the next slide? What did the just transition money in Prahova actually go towards so far? These are just some examples, but in order for citizens and regions to meet the social, employment, economic, and environmental effects of the transition, the money went on buying dentistry equipment, on building tourism villas, hotel expansions, some warehouses, investments in food industry and packaging. So the only call that was open so far is only targeted to small and medium-sized enterprises. And it works on a kind of trickle-down logic that if employment is strengthened, then the whole region can survive this better. Most of the projects had pretty limited objectives, like simply investing in the efficiency of the business, and somehow this was meant to be this bridge between the just transition objectives and on the ground realities. Now, it was really interesting because at the beginning, when we started interviews, we thought, how do we translate all of these environmental concepts and priorities to the group MMU, who are not very exposed to these concepts? But it became obvious pretty fast that they were living through these issues every day. They had a direct experience of environmental justice, of pollution, of environmental risks, of energy poverty. And while these were very coherent with just transition aims, and also particularly with the objective of leaving nobody behind, because let's say there were energy efficiency programs that are common in cities with large-scale renovations for energy efficiency, but in these marginalized communities, they're often ineligible, for any of these larger programs. But yes, in this vision, we'll see that where the money actually, meant to completely kind of cut them off, and these issues were left unaddressed. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So I think our big question is, how do we go beyond the narrative of middle-class employment when we shape a vision of the just transition? and how do we make that vision not shy away from poverty or addressing larger core issues such as energy poverty. And we think that one of the underlying causes is the way in which decision makers create a narrative about the just transition, and then how it proceeds to invite certain people to the discussion table based on that understanding. So we noticed some fractures. First of all, in how the just transition is understood, it mostly focused on employment and economic growth, ignoring all of the other elements of social or environmental sustainability. That meant that the issues experienced in MIMU were just not really part of the category of understanding of a just transition, so they weren't invited to the discussion table, which was focused on established economic actors. All around, these marginalized communities have very little forms of official organization. They're not really represented by political decision makers, by NGOs. They don't have local collective forms of organization. So it's very hard to make them eligible to, or in conversation to these broader policy processes. Also, I did a little thing. So I think one of the things that struck me most is that even though these people have a direct experience of environmental issues, the economic actors kind of know how to instrumentalize sustainability jargon. So even if at the end of the day, the investments are purely kind of investments in economic productivity, we'll see a lot of projects using words such as sustainability and heritage and participation without it actually connecting to the activities. Can we go on to the next slide, please? These are kind of the questions, right, that are still on our minds and we don't have answers to, and we hope that this dialogue will help. So how comes that there are funds that are dedicated to preventing marginalization, but they end up being inaccessible to marginalized groups themselves? Why is energy poverty not a part of the narrative of the just transition process? And why does it tend to exclude things like structural poverty or exclusion? How do we actually work with stakeholders that do have this process in their hands to create a common vision that doesn't shy away from multidimensional deprivation and sees it as a legitimate issue of environmental justice? And how do we create a bridge between EU funding and grassroots needs when this process is so easily co-opted by people who already have their foot in the door, in this case, the private sector? This is it from me. I'm hoping we'll get more insights from the panelists to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandra, really for that comprehensive overview of Bolster's work in Romania and also shedding light on the severe energy poverty situation in the Prahova region, which with a focus on informal settlements like MIMU. Your presentation also raised important questions about the accessibility of just transition funds for marginalized groups, especially when these groups might be considered informal or not being captured by these definitions of who should be benefiting from these funds or these policies. And it really highlights that there is an important need for better alignment of the policies with the realities of these people affected. So we will dive a little bit deeper into these issues with our coming presentations and also the panelists. And I've also seen that in the chat there was already one question, which is really great because we will be asking those who already have questions to please put them in the chat because we will have a Q&A session after the presentations. So please continue to do so. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Andreea Vornicu from the Center for the Study of Democracy at Babes Bolyai University in Cluj, Romania. Andrea is also affiliated with the Romanian Energy Poverty Observatory and will provide us with a more overview of the energy poverty situation in Romania. So please, the floor is yours, Andrea. Just making sure that you're able to unmute yourself.
I was about to explain in the chat. Good morning, everyone. So my presentation continues the discourse of Alexandra, trying to bring into discussion how do we measure energy poverty, what are the limitations, and what is the relevance of understanding the features of energy poverty in the context of just transition. Can you confirm me if you can hear me? Yeah, good. I see now that my camera is turned off. Exactly wrong. Anyway, with just transition, one of the core aspects of just transition is to leave no one behind. And from a mantra, this phrase somehow transformed into a sentence maybe without meaning. I mean, you can understand everything and nothing from it, leave no one behind. But one of the core issues is to identify the persons, the households who are most vulnerable. And Alexandra has already spotted the households affected by most likely extreme forms of energy poverty. However, across Romania, we have identified at the Romanian Observatory of Energy Poverty multiple dimensions of and manifestations of energy poverty. Now, one of the core issues, okay, so the sound is not very good. Now, anyway, I will continue. I hope
better now. Yes,
yeah,
thank you.
great. So one of the main issues is how do we measure energy poverty? At national level, we use a set of common indicators. These indicators have been developed by the literature and also the policymakers. And for calculating this data, we are using the household budget survey national data collected by the National Statistical Institute. So for I will present these four indicators: 2M, half M, low income, high cost, and 10%. And what they mean. So the 2M, the household spends more than the double of the national median on energy bills. Basically, with this indicator, we try to identify or see the percentage of households who spend a lot on energy bills. And for 2022, we see that more than 1 in 5 households are spending more than double of the national median. And also this indicator may present features of overconsumption. The next indicator, half the median, indicates features of underconsumption. So the household spends less than half of energy bills than the national median. Basically, these very low energy bills may indicate forms of underconsumption. So households cannot afford to consume the energy needed. Now, the low income, high cost indicates the households that fall below the poverty line after paying the energy bills, and they spend more than the national median on the bills. So we see that again, 1 in 5 households in Romania fall under the energy poverty within this criteria. And then 10% maybe it's the easiest to understand because the household spends more than 10% of their income on energy bills. And we see here that 37% of the households in Romania. These data are for 2022. We understand that 2022 was an extraordinary year because the energy prices were very high, even within the compensation mechanism. However, we see a trend of increasing. So more households in Romania are confronting with energy poverty in the last years, and it is very worrying because even with all these mechanisms in place, households are still struggling. Now, equally important, I mean, we have these national indicators, but it is equally important to understand their distribution. And we see that for most of the indicators, there is almost an equal distribution between urban and rural areas, except half the median, so the hidden energy poverty, the underconsumption, where almost 75% of the households are located in the rural areas. And this indicator correlates with other data from the field that indicated that a lot of households practice underconsumption. So they can afford to heat maybe one room, and during winter or the cold season, the entire household stays in one, maximum two rooms, because this is what they can afford. And I know that maybe for Romanians, this practice is not very uncommon, so most likely you have heard about it, but we also have it represented in the data. For all the other indicators, we see that more or less we have equal distribution between rural and urban areas. If we can go to the next slide. Now, what we have done here, we try to see how the indicators are distributed across income deciles. So across, we split the income on 10 deciles, basically, from the lowest category of income to the highest category of income. And as we can see, the underconsumption is very strong in the first two income deciles, so for the poorest households in Romania, which are located mostly in rural areas. And then we see that low income, high cost is very high across the third and the fourth income deciles. So for the households that most likely start using gas, are heating with gas, and are not extremely poor, but also are not into the medium income, so are from low income to medium income. Why it is very important to look at the distribution of the indicators, it's very important to try to better localize these households across Romania and across income groups. Also, the 10% indicator is very high up to the sixth income decile, where it is decreasing, indicating that energy poverty is not only an income poverty issue. So it overlaps over various mechanisms. Most likely these people are staying in poorly insulated buildings. Maybe they have other issues within their household, diseases or other specific situations that may put them into a context of vulnerability. Also, maybe they are forced to consume more energy because they are living in poorly insulated buildings. So as we can see, there are many issues that are overlapping, that are conducive to these very high numbers and to these distributions. Because I have to stick within the time, I will not go into all the details and all the graphs we have presented within the Romanian Observatory of Energy Poverty. But within the data that we have access to, we have identified all these patterns that are overlapping. Now, these indicators, and we can go to the next slide, which is the EU Silk indicators. So these indicators are based on the household budget survey data. There are another type of data sets that are used for assessing energy poverty, the inability to keep home adequately warm, arrears on utility bills, and the percentage of population living in dwellings with leaking roofs, damp walls, etc. Now, the inability to keep home adequately warm, we see how the percentage of households is increasing in the last 3 years. This indicator is important, but it is very subjective. I mean, people are asked about their perception to keep house adequately warm. We don't know exactly what's the thermal comfort of each household. It may be 20 degrees or 21 or 22 degrees. However, we know that in 2022,
The sound cut off.
Andrea, we lost you for a second. I think she might have gotten disconnected for a second. Andrea, are you back? I see you've joined the call. Okay, maybe as we wait for her to connect again, I see that George had put a question in the chat and Alexandra had replied. So George, in case no one was able to read it, George asked, in Prahova, you mentioned that the heating is done by wood stoves. Is the population density sufficient, at least in some places, for district heating? Or maybe there used to be district heating, but people disconnected from it, as unfortunately has happened a lot in Romania. And Alexandra replied saying, at a household level, homes are very overcrowded and the neighborhood is quite densely built up. But the major barrier here is informality and the fact that legally you could ignore that the neighborhood exists. So this goes back again to the informality of some of these marginalized groups. I'm not sure if Alexandra wants to add anything to this.
Yeah, maybe just that I know there are parts in Romania where entire towns are still heated by wood. So it's not that kind of issue. I think most of, at least particularly the big cities in Prahova, are connected to district heating, but particularly these informal settlements are cut off from it.
Thank you. And again, if anyone else has any other questions. I see we have one from Nadia. Are we looking at energy poverty only for heating, or is there also concern about cooling in the summer? I appreciate that this topography of Romania means that the warming weather in Bucharest may not be as much of a concern up north.
In Prahova, at least, I think, especially from our interviews, people were saying that they struggle much more with cooling in summer. As in, it definitely has kind of, homes have this greenhouse effect. They get very, very warm, but it's a, let's say it's a issue that intensified in the last couple of years. The thing in winter is that most of these houses are also very damp, leaking roofs, poorly insulated. So in the winter, I think the risk of other escalating problems, like a risk of illness, is much higher, and so it ends up intersecting with other kind of social and health issues. But yeah, I think cooling is definitely a very big problem.
Thank you.
Thank you both. We are still not able to reach Andrea, so maybe we can move on to the next presentation. Hopefully she might come back and we can hear a little bit more about these poverty indicators. But as we continue to delve into other regions and seeing how they address energy poverty, our next speaker will present a more community-based perspective. So I'm pleased to introduce Alexandru Kelemen, who's a social worker and executive director of the Association for Integrated Territorial Development of the Giului Valley, Romania. He will be giving a short overview of energy community solutions that are being implemented to address energy poverty in this valley. Please, Alexandru, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me today. I'm actually working with Andrea Vornicu, so I can tell you that her research is very important into doing something very important, actually measuring the energy poverty. So I'm a social worker, and it's sometimes very, very obvious that we mistake poverty in general with energy poverty. It's not only about the social problems of the communities, but it also, as we mentioned, that we can find energy poverty in very developed neighborhoods, to say so, because of low insulation or different kind of method, or as somebody said, the lack of district heating. So my name is Alexandru Kelemen. I'm the executive director of the Giului Valley governance. To say, I know that the association has a very long name, but we have an ITI instrument in Giului Valley in 21-27. And of course, we are also one of the regions under the Just Transition mechanism. And we have allocated from the Just Transition Fund in Romania, in the region of Hunedoara, a sum of money, which we would like to spend it wisely. It's not that much to rethink a little bit the social and economic environment in Giului Valley, but it's enough to put some, let's say, a good, healthy foundation for the future, actually. And one of the issues, looking a little bit in what we have done, is the need actually to address energy poverty. Because whilst we also have very, or at least all of the municipalities, the 6 municipalities in Giului Valley have social problems caused by the closing of the mines, because as you know, Giului Valley is roughly more intensive was more intensive in was mono industry and was only relying on mining. Now we also have a problem of economic diversification, hence the Just Transition mechanism. And in regards to the first presentation, of course, we are also connected to Prahova County, and we are waiting, of course, for the implementation of the TJTPs, and we are trying to do our best in regards to planning the money from the Just Transition so that they tackle actually also energy poverty, but in the same time redesign a little bit the economic environment. So I'm guessing actually that the examples that were actually related to the first call of proposals, which was opened by the Ministry of Investments in regards to supporting SMEs. And also we had quite a challenge in our area to actually rethink a little bit the economic environment. But coming back, just so I had a little bit of an introductory in regards to what was mentioned before. One of the things in Jiu Valley, which is very, very historical and very important in regards to the energy poverty, is the way that the buildings were built, actually to accommodate very fast and very urgently, actually, the mass of workers needed for the mining in the region, which especially in communist times was very, very important. And actually a lot of the people from all over Romania came in our area, and it needed to be accommodated. And of course this blocks were created, prefabricated very fast, actually, in order to accommodate very fast the people which were working in the mines. Now, when the mines are closed, of course, when we calculate actually the energy poverty of this building, we find out that actually we have a big problem. And we started analyzing how can we be self-efficient in regards to energy consumption, taking into consideration that in our region, for example, because we were energy producers also, we had mining, but we also had thermal power plant, which was also a provider for district heating. But as somebody mentioned in the chat, we have closed it for some time now because actually there were no investments in the transportation of heat. And at the moment, actually, the Complexul Termocentrala Paroșeni, which is called the thermal power plant, is actually working 1 week per month because of low capacities even to produce energy, because at the moment it's only producing electric energy. So in this sense, we said that, okay, we have to take into consideration first the need at the municipality level actually to reduce the consumption, be a little bit more efficient, because this is the first thing that we have to do from our point of view. So we need to be energy efficient firstly, and then start thinking about producing energy, even if it's an energy community, even if it's something else, because it makes no sense to produce energy in a building which has no windows or something like this. So first, we need to think a little bit what are the measures of energy efficiency, how can we storage, of course, afterwards, and how can we create this community so that we can encourage the people from the first presentation. How can we use this kind of a tool actually to help the ones who are vulnerable? And last but not least, is not about the just transition mechanism, is how to create a little bit of educational, let's say, comprehension within the community, so that we are a little bit more aware of the fact that it's not now, because Europe has started to think about being neutral or something like this, but it's how can we put it into education so that the children understand that it should be something important to be efficient. It's in very important actually to be to produce green energy, and what are the differences. Otherwise, if we cannot put this into culture, from my point of view, it's going to be let's say a very interesting first time when we have the money, but afterwards, if it's not in the culture, we will lose it. So this, from our point of view, embodies actually what we wanted to do, and we started to work on the concept of community energy a long time ago, and it needed a lot of preparation, because it's not only that it's our willingness, but it's also the willingness of the stakeholders in trying to explain what is energy community and why it should be beneficial in regards to the current conditions. So what we started at the moment, it's energy efficiency measures, energy producing producer, and energy storage. This is something that we are doing in parallel in order to prepare, in order to make as much as possible a good thing from the energy transition money, as I mentioned before. So together with the EIB and through different technical assistances, we've started working on the energy efficiency of a lot of the buildings that I've told you at the beginning. We are at the moment, I think you can go to the next slide. yeah, so in terms of energy efficiency, we started to work with European Investment Bank with technical assistance from Elena, where we started with 115 buildings. And also we have put a lot of money, let's say reserved a lot of money from the just transition mechanism towards energy efficiency. And how do we try to do this, and how can we prioritize actually these buildings? Because as you know, it's going to be, energy efficiency is going to be a big topic, also in the context of the EU social climate plans and social climate funds. So we need to prepare, actually, that's what we have to do. And we started working on the buildings, and we started to create a methodology in order to prioritize these buildings in relation actually to the vulnerable consumers. At the moment, we have only macro data, and actually I was counting on Andrea to finish her presentation, because it's very interesting. Their methodology, I think it's one of the most complete in order to evaluate, because it's not only about, as I mentioned, poverty in sense, but it's also about sometimes calculating a little bit of indicators, and this coming from a social worker. So I'm not saying that we should not go in the marginalized communities, we should, but sometimes there are some measures which needs to be focused on the center of the city. So we started doing this technical documentation and prioritizing the buildings in our region. And if you can go afterwards, then we started, okay, let's see, because we are talking now about residential buildings, but then we have to think about how can we make more efficient energy consumption at the public buildings, because it's also in our region a big problem in terms of social, so like the hospital or the schools. So we've charted actually what are the buildings and what is the consumption of each municipality. And we have discussed it also in the just transition context together with the Ministry of Investments, the possibility actually to invest in creating green energy. Next slide is fine. I'm just going to talk about it. So we've created actually some we've calculated also with the target technical assistance of PPP plants for own consumption. Why only for our own consumption? Is mainly the first step in our view to convince actually the municipalities that they need to be energy efficient, and actually to be aware of the fact that they have these capacities to cover lighting, electricity consumption in the social buildings like the hospitals, schools, public lighting, and green transportation, which fortunately, I think in 1 year in Jiu Valley will be all green buses, so everything will be electric. We've identified at the moment through this technical assistance 3 places where, even though there are 6 municipalities, 3 places where we can cover actually to produce how much all the municipalities are consuming at the moment in Jiu Valley. And also through this technical assistance VIB, we will find some storage solutions for an energy consumption. What we've also asked for is, because in Romania the legislation, maybe this going to be a topic in regards to energy communities. It's at the beginnings. I think it's very important to understand the fact that the energy community in Jiu Valley is pending, let's say, pending legislation, but in this we need to move forward. We cannot wait for the legislation actually to be mature enough. We have to prepare ourselves in order, when the legislation is done, then we can create actually the energy community. Going a little bit further with my presentation, is not going to be very long. Well, I think it's also very, very important is, as I mentioned before, one of the roles of the energy communities is to create the culture, and the culture in the community towards energy efficiency and towards green energy producing. It's not an easy thing to do, but it can start through a one-stop shop, which is a local one, and it has to be created. That means that some people coming from municipalities, but also SMEs, but also simple people who want to actually reduce their consumption, be more efficient, and maybe even produce something at a residential level, can come to a place and can find out, first of all, what can they do, and second of all, what are the maybe some subsidies available at the local level. And also part of the education part is to create a local community media advertising and promotion of energy efficiency and local contest. I know at the national level everybody's talking about big programs and stuff, but we need to go a little bit more in depth in our point of view and try to create like local contests in schools for a clean and energy efficient U value to see how they see it and things like this, putting into context. I've seen some very interesting examples of this kind of activities in schools at the grassroots level in Serbia, for example, and they had a lot of effect to see a little bit how the kids see energy producing from panels, solars, and things like this. Okay, and next slide, please. And we just calculated a little bit through this target technical assistance, which are some of the results. This was one of the means that actually made us convince the municipality, because sometimes the municipality needs to be a little bit convinced what are the advantages of doing this. And whilst our model is not for energy producing, but is auto consumption, and actually how can we through this money on JTF be more efficient, it actually calculated that there are some budgetary advantages for all municipalities. For example, not spending that much money on electricity by just accessing European funds to create clean energy for covering the need at the public level would create some good budgetary advantages for all of the municipalities. We just have 3 here: Petroșani, Vulcan, and Petrila. But there are as I mentioned, some advantages. Next slide, please. What we have to do next, because as the first presentation said, we are still a little bit lacking of call of proposals from the Just Transition mechanism, but and the first one which was launched was for SMEs, which is also very important from our point of view, at least from Geo Valley. And of course, there are also some of the projects which we don't endorse, let's say, in regards to this, because it's not our long-term strategies. It's actually to rethink a little bit and not only use it on services and things like this, because it's very, very shallow. But for the energy communities, we started the memorandum from local members, and very important actually that this is a voluntary act to be part of the energy community, is that the local members will be need to be voluntary. Of course, you can give them some advantages, but in the same time, they have to understand actually what's the thing. Feasibility, because we had some pre-feasibility for the first lot of energy efficiency for the buildings, and hopefully in December, according to our, let's say, sources, there will be, after also the legislation will be available, is then we will have the first call of proposals for energy communities in Romania through the Just Transition Fund. What I would like also to say in the last intervention is that you know that ANRE, which is the national regulator actually for energy in Romania, has issued, as you know, 2 energy models, and it's very interesting because we also tend sometimes when we try to do something to limit a little bit the willingness of the community. And from my point of view, in terms of energy communities, it's very important to keep an open mind in regards to the possibilities. It's not like a company where you have to have some very strict laws. You cannot force actually into strict models the willingness of the community. So from our point of view, and I know that maybe you are aware of these energy models, I think it's very important to have a little bit of flexibility in regards to the energy balancing costs for energy communities, because we are actually putting the same, let's say, communities in the same level as big companies, which is not from our point of view normal. And also it's very interesting to see actually that the energy communities are obliged to use licensed supplier, let's say, and I think there should be a little bit more broad in regards to this, if there is a willingness and the capacity at local level to do it in an open market. And also at the way that, for example, that the community comes together should be also very broad. And these are three messages which I think were also sent to the ANRE, and we will keep on lobbying, to say the least, in regards to this. But I think that the community should have the final say in regards to how the energy community should go, of course, in a national framework, but which is not limitative in terms of regulation, but provides actually the necessary capacity and the necessary framework where their willing is taken into consideration. That would be from our point of view. This is what we've done in GU Valley. We also we are preparing and lobbying in the same time. In the just transition mechanism, we are in a preparing phase where we are doing technical documentation. That's it. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, of course, afterwards, I am here for the entirety of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandru, for really a presentation that touched upon different topics, ranging from what you're doing with the energy solutions, but also this point that you touched upon about teaching people in general about how important energy efficiency is. And I think we always have to think about how to target this also to marginalized groups, especially because maybe their needs are different, or maybe they're just focused on immediate survival in most cases. So a question from me would just be how to make sure that this is integrated in the teaching for marginalized groups, so that energy efficiency can be a topic that is in their culture and daily practices. So yeah, thank you very much for your intervention. As already you said, the floor remains open for any questions. I see that we already have one. Thank you, Alexandra. So Alexandra asks, I think the GU Valley region had one of the most impressive just transition plans and vision in how it addressed real risks and opportunities presented by the energy transition. But do you feel like the just transition calls for proposals allows you to put the strategy into action? Will another call open up that would allow you to work on energy communities, or do you put your hopes in other programs or policy processes?
Well, if it's a question for now, and I can answer now because it's only one of the questions, of course, GU Valley has, I will not say impressive. We have a lot of impressive strategies. It's not a question of how impressive the strategy is, it's a question how you can put the strategy into practice. Even the TJTP, but we also have the strategy for GU Valley, which stands at the foundation of the ITI, which is actually took into consideration, the TJTP took into consideration this big strategy, let's say so. Do I feel like the JT call for proposals allows you to put the strategy into action? At the moment, I think that we need to work with MIPE in regards to for them to understand that actually we have to make a place-based approach. So funding should be place-based approach. If you don't do this, of course, it's a work that we're doing, and we have a very good contact with Ministry of Investments. And I think the programs need to go further. I think we are a little bit late. To be honest, I think last year we were a little bit late in regards to this. So I was always, because I come from a different environment and I don't know all the scheme, the very different pathways in order for a call of proposal to be approved. But I think it's very important that we take in all of the entirety of the available money. Sometimes it's not also about money, to be honest. I think there is going to be a lot of resources, and actually Europe, because we are in Europe, actually we have a lot of, the recovery mechanism, and we have a lot of things. We just need to be organized ourselves at the local level actually to prepare the projects first of all. So I'm not asking first that the ministry is doing something, but first we are preparing, and if we have mature enough projects, and this is why we are working on the technical documentation, so that we have very big mature projects, because if we have mature projects and if there is a willingness at local level actually that these projects should be implemented according to the principles of the Just Transition Fund and the Just Transition mechanism itself, bottom-up approach will be put into place. So I would encourage all of the regions which are under Just Transition to prepare projects, and I'm very sure that MIPE, the Ministry of Investments, will listen. And otherwise, we can also do more lobby, let's say, at higher levels. But it's very, very important, first of all, to prepare, to do your own homework, and afterwards to start looking for funding, because funding is available and you can find different kind of options everywhere. But this mechanism goes bottom up. This was the promise when we approved TJTP, and the principles should still be in place. So if there will not be any call of proposals, we will have the projects prepared, and we will go to the ministry and we will put them in the mailbox of the ministry, and we'll say these are the projects, they respect the rules, of course, of the Just Transition mechanism, the framework of the program itself. And I'm very sure that we will find a solution together with the national authorities that the projects will be funded. But let's do our homework at the beginning, and afterwards I think it's more good decision, because we were least, and now we'll finish with this, we were taught that we have to wait for call of proposals. This is not going to work, to be honest. I think it's very, very important to go to the ministry and work with them together, because it's in everybody's interest that the program goes well, because if the call of proposals, we will wait for the call of proposals, then maybe the impact, because this is what we are trying. We are not trying just to run some money through a program. We are trying to create some impact, and the ministry will listen to the local community. And if the local community is organized, if the local community has projects, that would be at least our approach at the moment. We'll see. Maybe next year, if you invite me to a meeting and say, but this is at least what we are trying to do at the moment in Gilbert.
Thank you very much. And if there are no further questions in the chat, maybe a last few seconds if anyone wants to type anything. Thank you everyone for the great questions and for the great answers. It's been really insightful. Now we're a bit behind schedule, so I would propose that we shift our focus to the panel discussion. If there are any remaining questions, please feel free to still put them in the chat. We will have some time at the end of the event to hopefully answer some of them. And yes, so the panel discussion will focus a little bit or explore the broader topic of just transition and energy poverty. And we have several guiding questions, as mentioned already in the Slido. So if you would like to interact with that, please go back to the Slido links and please answer the questions, and we will see it on the screen again. So before we begin, I would like to introduce our panelists. I would ask our panelists to keep their introductions very short. But I'm very happy that all the panelists are here today, and they bring really a wealth of expertise and diverse perspectives to the conversation. So perhaps we can start off with Anka Sine, please.
Okay, it was difficult for me to unmute myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
So hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be on board of this discussion. Today, my name is Anca Sinia. I'm a lecturer in political science at the University of Babeș-Bolyai, Cluj-Napoca, Romania. and coordinator of the Romanian Energy Poverty Observatory, which is an initiative developed within the university, a research initiative. We closely cooperate with experts to evaluate energy poverty. And I'm working closely with Andrea and a couple of other colleagues in doing this. But we're also involved in policy supports, in all of these dialogues that are developed at different levels of decision-making in Romania. And I'm also a member alternate of the European Economic and Social Committee, where energy poverty is my main focus. So basically, we are assessing European legislation, we are inputting European legislation and formulating opinions with a focus on energy poverty and energy transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anca. Now I would like to ask Ana Maria Elian to introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Ana Maria. I'm an urban planner specialized in participatory practices. I'm part of the team of KBT Make Better. That's an organization in Romania that coordinates strategic planning and urban regeneration processes, particularly in small, medium towns in Romania. I have been coordinating the bolster research in Prahova and also other initiatives in Romania that try to create more bridges between local communities and national and EU level ambitious, let's say.
Thank you, Anna. And we're also joined today by Anna Bayomi, please.
Hello, I'm Anna Bayomi, and I work as an energy poverty policy officer at FEANSA, which is the Federation of Homeless Service Providers in Brussels. And within my work, I also analyze the European policy framework from the green transition, from the perspective of vulnerable households and people that are living in unfit housing.
Thank you, Anna. Next, I would like to have Gal Podlaszewski introduce himself, please.
Hi, I'm Gal, and I'm an architect, and I am carrying out projects of mostly also energetic renovation of social housing in central Germany.
Thank you, Gal.
Dealing with housing associations.
Thank you. And lastly, Nadia Parpulova.
Hello?
Yes.
Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my name is Nadia and I represent the University of National and World Economy in Sofia. The department I represent deals with transport and energy, but my focus is energy. I'm coordinating the bolster work in Stara Zagora, especially working with the marginalized communities and underprivileged communities in Stara Zagora, exploring the effect of the just transition on them. And have also been involved in broader research concerning green hydrogen production and application, as well as energy communities is something that's quite important and vibrant at the moment. And it seems that our department is one of the most active ones on the topic, and perhaps the most advanced in terms of how it should happen in Bulgaria. So yeah, this is in brief. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for the introductions. Now maybe we can move on to the next slide and begin the discussion. As I mentioned, the discussion will be guided some of this by the Slido questions that we've already asked. So the first question that I would ask the panelists, in your region, does the Just Transition Mechanism address the issue of energy poverty? And if so, what do you think are the access barriers for very marginalized groups, such as the Roma community, people living in informal settlements, as we've seen in some of the presentations, and those facing high economic deprivation? I'd like to maybe begin by hearing from either Anka or Nadia.
Okay, so we have been implementing research, performing research in various regions in Romania, both in the area where Just Transition Mechanism is implemented, and in areas which are outside the focus of the Just Transition Mechanism. So in Romania, there are 5 regions that are covered by the Just Transition Mechanism. So our research has basically been beyond these regions. Generally, there is a problem touching these very vulnerable populations. When we call them extreme energy poor communities, by using a concept that is more of a scientific one, extreme energy poverty communities that are covered by or find themselves at the intersection of various challenges, and the poverty element is one of it, and it's very important problem of their situation. But there are legal issues that cover their problematic. There are social inclusion versus social exclusion, so more of a social sort of representation and participation aspect that touch upon their issues. And I can stop here or go on with the problems. My point is that the more we add some of the problems, the more we realize how complex it is to get to these populations, whether they're part of the Just Transition Mechanism or they're outside, because it needs a recognition and validation within the programs of all these aspects of vulnerability that they deal with, and they're not simple issues. I mean, when we try to touch upon these communities, with just financial aid, then you realize you stumble against a wall, which is a legal wall, right? Because sometimes they may not be touched by these because they don't have the legal situation to receive the money. Or from other perspective, you may want to touch them from a financial point of view, but maybe they are not the let's say the population that matter very much in terms of political issues, or political power, political re-election. From that point, they're not a political voice. So from what we have encountered in all of these projects and research projects that we have been implementing, all these issues that define their situation. And if we refer to the Roma population specifically, or to different other, extreme energy poverty communities, because in Roma communities, you don't only have Romas, right? So in the Roma, or extreme poverty communities, you don't only have Romas, you have, other ethnic groups as well. You have Romanians, you have Hungarians, you have other ethnic groups. There are multiplicity of aspects that need to be considered. And unfortunately, the way that the programs are being designed are not necessarily open to accommodate all these situations. In one project that we are currently working on, research, one aspect that we have stumbled across, and I do not want to particularize in order not to point out maybe the issues that are in a specific community, is the fact that at some points it's also the decision makers, let's say, fault, or decision makers limitation to facilitate these funds. Sometimes these communities are not interesting enough for decision makers. in order to, let's say, distribute the funds in that direction. And we see that at a certain point, the decision makers take the easy route and they go towards the communities where data is readily available, projects are readily implementable, easier to be implemented, and therefore we get the answer, well, let's go and study energy poverty in this other community, which is a bit better off. I mean, energy poverty is complex. You can have extreme energy poor with houses that are not, legally built and so on and so forth, or you can have energy poverty in communities with blocks, communist blocks, right? The fact that they're better off living in blocks, in communist blocks, doesn't mean that excludes them from energy poverty. They do still deal with the issue. But the fact is that the choice is made at a decision-making level, whether that is local or national, between what is easier and faster and what is more difficult and slower to do. And most of the time, they decide to go for what is a bit easier to make. And this is why, we had this response from the local decision maker. Let's go into the community that is a bit easier and maybe it's a bit more interesting, politically speaking. So there are a list of situations or examples of situations that limit the access to these extremes, so really, really poor, energy poor, or hopeless situations. So just to sum up, and I don't want to, maybe some other issues will come up from the discussions brought up by the other colleagues in the panel, but two aspects that I would like to sum up with and to finish with is that sometimes the programs are not fit to take into consideration the complexity of the situations that are presented on the ground. And two is the decision makers level, where sometimes, we go for what is easy, what is faster, not necessarily what is not in need of energy poverty measures, but, well, maybe not the extreme and the most vulnerable groups out of all that we have to deal with. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anka. Perhaps Nadia would like to add to the conversation.
Thank you, Savannah. I completely agree with what Anka has outlined, and this differentiation she made between energy poverty and extreme energy poverty. I mean, it's absolutely a similar case in Bulgaria because, first of all, we don't even have a legal definition of what energy poverty is. And the fact of life is that energy poverty concerns well-developed neighborhoods with people who are not considered marginalized, integrated in the society with jobs, but they still experience energy poverty. And our research, the Bolster project, we were focused on the extreme energy poverty cases. And we focused on the Roma community, single women, was another, single parents, not only women, was another group that we focused on. So what we realized is that they were completely disconnected from the process. The funding that is planned under the Just Transition Plan, they don't understand it. They don't see the opportunities for themselves. And there is a complete lack of communication with this part of the society. The extremely poor, energy poor groups, especially the Roma community, they face very serious access barriers that I don't see any attempt in these barriers being overcome. We face the same issues like in Romania, lack of formal property rights, illegal buildings. This means that the group is not motivated to access any EU funding or programs because this means to legalize the property, to pay tax. They're sometimes reluctant, most of the times reluctant to do so. Also, there is a complete energy. I mean, they are completely illiterate in terms of energy efficiency issues, etc. And all these barriers make the group very difficult to handle. What we were trying to recommend to the regional authorities was to open the door and invite the NGOs that have a history of working with severely marginalized people. They seem to be excluded from the process, thinking that this is an energy matter, energy discussion, and the social aspect seems to be neglected. And I think that these NGOs know very well the details and how these marginalized communities operate, what is specific about them, and they are very, how to say, important player in the process, which at the moment is excluded in Bulgaria. And I was very impressed by what Alex shared. Experts in Bulgaria believe that energy communities is probably a very good path to undertake for tackling extreme energy poverty. But again, we don't even have the legislation on energy communities. We have very difficult legal process of establishing renewable energy plants, licensing renewable energy plants. There are no shortcuts for doing so if it's an energy community initiative driven, even if it's driven from bottom up, which comes from the people from the regions. Again, they cannot at the moment they cannot set up one. So just transition is the Bulgarian just transition plans do talk about energy poverty. They do talk about supporting the marginalized communities, but in reality, at the moment, we have only one funding, which was announced in June, for energy efficiency insulating buildings, and the requirements, the documentation, and the bureaucracy involved just by default excludes the energy poor communities. So yeah, this is the reality at the moment. Just briefly, from just adding to what Anka is saying, I think very much the same issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia and Anka, for sharing some of your observations. From the Slido, I see that people have been saying essentially some of the same things that you have brought up. And one of the answers to the question on the Slido talked a little bit about the lack of understanding of energy poverty in general, but also about not having consistent indicators to compare. And one of our panelists also mentioned that maybe it's not even interesting for policymakers to address these groups based on the data that they have. But because we have Andrea back on the call, and I'm not sure we will have the chance to go back to the presentation. Maybe, Andrea, if you have anything to add to this conversation about poverty indicators, please feel free.
Hello again. Very sorry for the technical issue I had. I wouldn't add necessarily too much because I'm convinced that the main topics have been already addressed. The only aspect that remained on my presentation was the role of local authorities in mapping the vulnerable groups and identifying them, and also the role of local authorities in collecting and using their data in this process of identifying and then developing solutions. But otherwise, the aspects related to extreme energy poverty and the features of these groups, I think all have been addressed. So I wouldn't stress again on these issues.
Thank you, Andrea. So we've already discussed a little bit of the issues, the access barriers. So maybe we can move on to our next question, which touches upon practical solutions. So the question would be, what successful initiatives or strategies have you observed that empower marginalized communities to address energy poverty? And how do you perceive their potential contributions to the broader energy transition process? So here again, I would invite Anka and Nadia to give their reflections on this question.
Thank you so much, Savannah. I really like the word reflection. That means that we're not here to give a definite answer, but only to point out some of the things that we have reckoned through time. One of the fundamental, let's say, governance creeds that the Romanian Energy Poverty Observatory has are the trilateral committees, so sort of a committee working mechanisms, which we're proposing at every level of governance in terms of when we think about energy poverty. So we're discussing this mechanism with the government, we're discussing this mechanism with local authorities. What is basically this mechanism? It is an inclusive mechanism, inclusion mechanism that tries to integrate in the discussion all the parties that are relevant to the issue. And these are the representative of government on the one hand. On the other hand, so why it is a trilateral? Because it's three parties, right? So in one party is the government, the other party is the market and market actors. Because let's face it, we all owe sort of a bill to somebody that secures energy for us, or a private actor in a way or another. And the third party is the civil society, the consumer, the individuals, any type of form of association between these individuals that can take part in this conversation. And democracy offers us a variety of forms of association and representation that is needed. Now, this type of mechanism we're trying to push forward in order to make decision making a bit more, let's say, aware and responsive to the needs on the ground and to the needs of the parties, and but also to make decisions in this field a bit more, relevant for each party in itself. Now, when we speak about marginalized groups, usually, despite of these very complex and, let's say, academic formulas that we find, they are excluded. And there's one more layer which I really liked, that Alexandru pointed out in his presentation, is that it is pointless in making decisions from an office in the capital, any capital of the countries that would be in, part of the just transition mechanism. It's pointless in taking decision there without, maybe looking more into what's happening on the ground, and sort of leaving decisions to be taken, initiatives to be made at the grassroots of any implementation. And I think it's basically in the spirit of the just transition mechanism. And I went over it again just to confirm my knowledge about it, is that for instance, the TJTPs should be developed and cited by the national and regional authorities in consultation with local partners. So this is a very complex integration sort of mechanism, recognition mechanism, where the needs of the local communities should be integrated in the discussion. Now, we have such type of mechanisms that are good practice, and the region that or the micro region that Alexandru was talking about is a very good example of efforts pushed forward in that respect, and initiatives taken from the local environment. But I am sure, and we know from the many discussions we've had with Alexandru, and he knows how difficult it is. It is very difficult because all the let's say positions that are sort of not against includes an inclusive discussion in such a, there are many forces that you need to integrate, and many opinions that you need to integrate in that. And cooperation, it does not come natural, and it does not come natural, especially in a post-communist environment. So dialogue is difficult, initiative is difficult, and inclusion of all the marginalized communities is difficult. Including, so speaking of the most marginalized communities, there are various initiatives, and more they're being taken into consideration, but it is not enough still. So including these organizations that work very, very closely with the communities in need, that know what they're dealing with. I'm sure that all of us are aware of the fact that in extreme energy communities, they face a situation where they are more marginalized by the mechanisms of and the workings of their situation than not. For instance, in a community where they do not afford or cannot legally connect to electricity, they're forced to buy from one seller, right, of the community that has their documents on their housing. So this neighbor buys energy legally and sells it to the community around it, right? To prices that are much higher than they would otherwise buy it from the company that directly sells energy if they had a legal situation. So such situations are better known by NGOs that work with these people, integrating them, contacting them. As Nadia said, there needs to be an affirmative, a very direct engagement from decision makers with these communities. They need to go to them and ask and involve them in the process in order to be able to recognize all the challenges that they go through. So integrating them in the discussion is not an easy thing. It requires a lot of effort, but is necessary. Representation of all parties is necessary in order to be able to come forth with solutions that suit their needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Anka. I see Ana Maria has raised her hand, and I was just going to say, if there are any other panelists who would like to intervene, please, you all have the chance to just unmute yourself. So please, Ana Maria.
Thank you. So just to build on some of the reflections before, I really think that energy poverty should not be treated as a separate issue, but as part of a larger problem, actually. And I think in order to actually effectively address this, we should sometimes rephrase the question as how to support marginalized communities to actually overcome more systemic problems that keep them in precarious situations, such as living in an informal settlement or in very poor housing conditions. And in this case, starting from the very root of the problem, such as regulating an informal settlement if this is possible, or providing decent housing alternatives as a first step in addressing some of the problems arising from informality, and energy poverty, of course, is just one of them. And of course, in such a process, having the local community directly involved in all the decisions that are being taken and in actually designing all the steps is really important. And as we saw in some of the examples that we've been involved in. But then, of course, sometimes having these long-term processes takes time, and in the meantime, there are many things that can be done at a very grassroots level. And I just want to give the example of the experiment that we're doing now in Prahova. It is not yet best practice examples because we don't know if it will work. But what we're trying to do now within the bolster project is to build a bank of materials for local community living in an informal settlement, to then support them in making small improvements in their home that would increase a bit the energy efficiency situation there, until the larger issue of regulating the informal settlement and other bigger problems are being solved. So it's just a first step, and we see how difficult also this small step is, convincing private donors to engage in this cause or accessing even technical expertise to support them into actually building their homes better. We also encounter many discrimination barriers and again, larger systemic problems. But yes, just wanted to add this to other layers.
Thank you, Anna. Perhaps, Nadia, I'm not sure if you have a short intervention that you would like to make.
Yeah, just indeed a very short intervention just to share some experience from our end. When we speak of engaging marginalized community, what we found out when we got involved with the bolster project was that the marginalized communities wanted to be engaged. They were actually eager to be engaged and to be asked. For this purpose, our partner locally in Stara Zagora was the most visible socially engaged NGO that has undertaken the biggest housing project, social housing project in Bulgaria. And their experience from this was that half of they literally built a whole neighborhood of social housing. And at the moment, as we speak, half of it is empty. The marginalized community, they refuse to move into the social housing. Because it was a part of their real integration. They had to pay the bills after this, they had to maintain the houses. So there is a lot of work to be done with the extremely marginalized communities to help them to integrate. And there is a lot of communication and education work to be done of what we discovered. But anyway, I started with just adding on that we found out that they wanted to be engaged and they had a lot to say. As far as they were concerned, the just transition process, the social aspect of it, they saw it in two ways. One was job creation, so they can be sure that they can have job opportunities, and the other one was tackling energy poverty and how can they pay their energy bills. These were the only two aspects that they were ready to talk about and that they were concerned with. And finally, just to finish, a very interesting conclusion we came to during our last focus meeting was that they thought that the decision makers at high level should be educated by the marginalized communities, not the other way around, not the decision makers educating the marginalized communities of what they need, but the marginalized community to educate them of what appropriate steps for integrating and involving them would be. And they were ready to do so if given the opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. It's very interesting to see the different issues that occur in the different just transition regions, but also where there are similarities. And I think that's what these dialogues are all about, is having these comparisons and being to discuss with people. For example, now we're talking to people in Romania, but also Bulgaria. So now I would like to shift our focus a little bit. We would like to talk a little bit about the architectural and the construction aspects of this discussion. So here I would give the floor to Gal with our first question. what role can the construction and renovation of energy efficient buildings play in the just transition for communities affected by energy poverty?
Thank you, Savannah, and thanks to everyone for a great discussion and contribution. It was very interesting to listen to you. Actually, a lot has been already said, also by Alex. My contribution is, as I said, by carrying out the energetic transition on the ground by improving the existing buildings, which I could frame as projects which address eligible buildings, which means they have to be able to be planned through, to be analyzed, to be designed, and renovated. Just trying to lean on to your discussion about the legality of buildings, it makes it, of course, much more complex and challenging. From my side, I had a hard time also thinking about a community here in Germany, because actually the market is very highly dominated by rental markets. So people who are mostly considered as energy impoverished would most likely rent social housing, which is then administered by housing associations, and then they in turn manage the whole renovation process in quite a, let's say, professional way. Nevertheless, they have to also face challenges, such as challenges of small towns, where the rent is relatively low compared to cities, and the building costs are nevertheless the same. So it also narrows down the possible solutions to very simplified ones, and they often have to choose between living quality and energetic efficiency, and so on and so on. So it is always very challenging design process of choosing what has higher priority, whether access barriers or energy efficiency in the end. So there is a lot of planning and calculation on the background, just to show how complex the decision process might become in because of that, especially in the areas of smaller towns or rural areas where the budget is generally much smaller, but the costs are not necessarily falling down proportionally. Therefore, yeah, it can be said only the wealthy can afford saving. That's the paradox. Therefore, your approaches of looking for alternative solutions, such as community housing for the extremely impoverished, are extremely valuable, and the world has seen positive examples of such housing. So I'm very excited also about the Bulgarian experiences, about the community housing built for such people, how it will process, what kind of experiences it will gather. Yeah, I would stop here.
Thank you, Gal. Indeed, maybe we can also talk a little bit about what your organization does in particular, especially if you engage with marginalized communities in the design and implementation of energy efficient housing projects, especially in the context of relying a bit on investors and such. And I think for the sharing screen, we can move on to the next slide, perhaps. I know, not yet, but anyways, the question still remains, Gal. Thank you.
Yeah, I can only relate to locally designed funding programs. In Germany, there is a special bank which is providing financing for energetic transition. It's called KfW, and it kind of designs the possible financing modalities to the market. And as I said, the communities are represented by housing associations, so it is pretty much structured in the sense, and also the ownership is very much clarified. It's in one hand, so there is a very short decision-making process, which makes things much easier and saves a lot of time. And it refers to the normal communist blocks that were already mentioned earlier in the discussion. That's the 90% of my projects, and there's still a lot which have not been renovated since 1989. So it's really thousands of buildings, and it has taken already 25 years to renovate them, and not all have been renovated yet. And slowly they are also becoming buildings of heritage in some cases, so it will be becoming even harder to renovate them. However, in many cases, they have also been maintained in a very well quality. So not much renovation needs to be done in terms of energy efficiency. That's also a possible case.
Thank you very much, Gal, for your insights on sustainable construction and your work in the architectural side of things. Perhaps we can move on to the next question, which is already shared on the screen. What specific funding programs empower marginalized citizens and civil society more to address energy poverty? And I would also invite the panelists to, if they have any experience with the funding programs, to also give their reflections on what works and doesn't work. Perhaps we could start with Nadia.
Yeah, thank you, Savannah. I did touch upon this earlier that I mean, marginalized communities have difficult access to funding, but if it's I mean, if they're helped by more established NGOs or the regional authorities, then it is possible for them to benefit from such funding streams. At the moment, there is a big problem in Bulgaria because there are two mainstreams that could be helpful and could be accessed. One is the Just Transition Fund, obviously, and the other one is the National Recovery Plan. Unfortunately, both streams are under a lock at the moment. The National Recovery Plan is not active due to some issues in communication that goes on with the European Commission, lacking legislation that has not been passed by Parliament. So the stream that is dedicated, the money that is dedicated in this recovery plan, I think 130 million euros for energy efficiency and targeting also marginalized communities is not open and not accessible at the moment. The Just Transition plans are being just recently started. A good thing that has happened last month was the establishment of regional expert councils involving NGOs, citizens, regional authorities, and it's the first logical move that has been done since the negotiation of the plans has started, because until this moment the whole process was detached for some reason from the regions, and it was left within the hands of central government, and somehow it didn't work. Central government, as Anka mentioned, sitting in their offices, they cannot cover the needs and make the proper decisions of what funds, how, etc. So we very much are hopeful and rely upon these regional councils that have been formed, that they will make some sensible decisions and will address energy poverty and the needs of the marginalized communities. They're already brought to the table, discussions are taking place, but as I said, it's still a very, very early stages, unfortunately, of the process. We have already lost 200 million euros from being too slow and too late. And I think that it's very likely that Bulgaria will lose even more money from the Just Transition Fund. Let's hope it won't happen. Let's hope that these councils will be more active and motivated to, to target the funding properly and quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. I see Anna has her hand raised.
Thank you for the possibility to intervene. At FEANTA, we work a lot on funding energy efficiency measures for vulnerable households, observing different funding mechanisms and highlighting the ones that are working well with low-income households. And what I observed during my work is that often general energy efficiency measures are not accessible for low-income households because they require the household to cover the upfront cost, and then they give back the money afterwards when the intervention is already done. And it also requires a lot of administrative work, and bureaucratic requirements are pretty high. And also national funding schemes. So this is true for both national and EU level funding schemes. And we saw a case in Hungary where a local NGO set up a revolving fund to cover the upfront costs of the renovations of vulnerable households, and they also provided technical and social assistance for managing the renovation and to choosing the right measures to do. It was done by Habitat for Humanity Hungary, but in order to make these funds accessible generally for the low-income public, then it would be necessary to include these basic rules into the general funding schemes, and also to make sure that both funding of the Just Transition Fund that we are now talking about specifically, like a very specific part of it is arriving to marginalized communities, and it's not only targeted to easier audiences like small and medium enterprises or large industries that also need the support to decarbonize and to keep their big employment potential in the regions. But if we don't make basic rules to make the fundings accountable from the perspective of how many low-income households they are serving or how many homes of these disadvantaged communities have been renovated, then we easily miss the opportunity to do to deliver a just transition. So at FEANZ, we advocate for ring fencing mechanisms, for example, in the ERDF funding, in order to deliver energy efficiency measures for low-income households as well. And maybe a last thought on to give also a more positive outcome of my intervention is that the newly adopted Energy Efficiency Directive requires member states to deliver a proportional share of energy efficiency measures for of energy saving measures for low-income households. So the percentage of, if they have like 15% of energy per household, 15% of the annual energy savings should be saved among these households. So also targeting funding schemes to these households will also help member states to reach these EU requirements as well, not only the notion of just transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Please, Nadia, go ahead.
Absolutely agree with what Anna said. I noticed something in Alec's presentation earlier when he spoke of the necessity of the projects to be mature in advance of announcing the call. And this seems to be the stage where most participants in the process, being it NGOs or regional authorities or even marginalized communities organized in a different manner, they stumble there because they don't have the funds to prepare all the technical parts of a project proposal. So therefore, they don't have the so-called mature projects in hand once the call is open. And I don't see any funds available for feasibility studies or for technical preparation. Like Elena Fund seems to be very efficient with it, but I think that authorities should be, really focusing on the preparation stages before just announcing the cost. There should be money for feasibility studies and technical preparation. I agree with Alec about the maturity of the projects not being, funded at this stage. And it seems to be a problem. The regional authorities don't have the funding for this. They're always short of technical expertise, always short of money for preparation work. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. I see Alex has also raised his hand. Sorry, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I think I had to. Yeah. So in regards to the where are the funds actually from for maturing the projects? Because that's one of the questions, and sometimes it was also the big challenge that we had at the beginning because we had a lot of technical assistance. But mostly the technical assistance which was provided was mainly for pipeline of projects, things which were very good at the strategic level, let's say, how to design the strategy, how to do it. But when you switch from strategy to implementation, then you need resources, a lot of resources, especially in bureaucratic and highly centralized states like Romania and Bulgaria, actually to switch from this to that. So what we tried actually was to look at the options which are provide technical assistance by doing the technical documentation. So this is something, one of the lobby lists to focus technical assistance, not only in, usually when you have technical assistance, it's a consultant says, we are working with you, you tell us what to do. Actually, we are working with you. Okay, we need also the resources to do the data collection, everything which is done on the ground, which is costly and which takes a lot of time. First of all, because in Romania, at least, what we've identified is the technical assistance associated with the cohesion plan, which is something new. But also, so there is a program of technical assistance within the cohesion plan, the cohesion policy for Romania, where we've discussed with the managing authority to actually help us maturing at least a pipeline of projects which was previously identified. So the first step is, of course, you make the strategy, you make the pipeline of projects. The next step would be, we've all agreed upon that, we have to start working on the ground, because what we thought it's very nice at the strategic level might be that at the local level, when you go in the ground and you start digging, let's say, it's not quite the reality that you had planned from the office, even at local level. So I think it's very important actually to underline the need, the technical assistance at the moment, especially for this kind of interventions from TJTP. We already have a TJTP, a plan which should include some of the key let's say projects to be implemented for the success of the just transition, for example, or for the success of an ITI. You have to start somewhere in order, because everybody says nobody sees just transition. Of course, you don't see it at the moment because we've only discussed about it for 2 years. We need to see some of the project. We have already identified some of the project. Let's put the money from technical assistance associated with the program, because the Just Transition Fund actually has a technical assistance component. Usually it's for salaries and things like this, but it should have a component for maturing the projects in the pipeline of projects. I mean, of course, you identified the stakeholder who is going to implement, which is also interesting. It could be another conference about how to identify people to do the measures from the strategy or from the TJTP. But in the same time, I think it's very, very important to stress that the technical assistance associated with the Just Transition Fund in Bulgaria or in Romania or anywhere should also cover preparing technical documentation for some of the projects which will be on the ground sooner or later. That's at least our perspective. And we found, at least at the ministry level, for example, understanding about this is because we also want to switch from dreams to concrete stuff on the ground. And without, as you said, resources for maturing some of the projects, it's quite difficult to do it. Sorry, just wanted to complete what Nadia said before. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandru. Thank you to all the panelists for contributing to this question. Perhaps we could move on to the next one. So my question to the panelists, and here I open the floor to everyone. What are the challenges in building energy communities or getting people organized to act on the issue of energy poverty together? And how does this differ when we are working with people facing multiple dimensions of deprivation? Yes, please go ahead, Anka.
So energy communities is a complex problem. Part of it is legislative, just as Alex Kellerman mentioned earlier, and I don't think it's very need to go into the detail. The organization of the civil society are lobbying for the change of legislation and change of attitude of the government with respect to how this concept is being implemented and what the framework is. But besides the legislative limitations, we have limitations with regard to capacity and knowledge of local administrations to disseminate this instrument with the local communities. And we've engaged with local communities around Cluj-Napoca, not necessarily here in the region, but elsewhere. And there is one very specific challenge that this, let's say, instrument deals with when it's about local administrations. There are local administrations that are more skillful in dealing with so implementing projects, various kinds of projects in their communities, and others that are less skillful. And usually those that are more skillful are also the richest ones and the larger communities, local, so big urban areas, right? But just the moment you walk out of a large urban area, you find smaller communities that do not have the capacities to deal with these issues, and they don't have the knowledge. And we've seen over the years local public administrations that are that have high desires to join this road of transformation, energy transformation, and transitioning to what is a cleaner and more just solutions for their communities and for their local economies, but they don't have the knowledge of what to do, where to start, how to engage the community. So there are a variety of issues, from the technical, what is an energy community. So therefore, a lot of good practice and, you know, getting in touch with good practices around the European Union is needed. Of what are the requirements, the legal requirements, and how we can, jump over the difficult fences, or basically engage with the national governments in, going over these difficulties that are for local communities. And then another aspect is information. How would you convince somebody from a smaller urban locality or from a village to basically engage in such a model? And that involves sort of a knowledge of entrepreneurship. That is, what Nadia pointed out earlier, the absence of this knowledge of dealing, so the literacy of dealing with all of these issues is still there, and we're struggling with that. So these challenges are, so my point is these challenges are much higher in the communities that have smaller administrations and that have been more marginalized as, you know, with respect to the discourse and the exchanges on the topic of energy solutions with that respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Anka. I see that Alexandru still has his hand raised. I'm not sure if he would like to. No. In this case, maybe I could invite Anna to give her reflections, especially with her work at Fianța, working on homelessness. Perhaps you have something to add when it comes with, yeah.
Well, I work very little on energy communities, and maybe the only example that I can give, which is a bit specific related to that, is more relevant for the sector of homeless service providers, which would be a bit out of the scope of this discussion, but maybe I can add that we organized a workshop with our members in Hungary to see what extent they are accessing EU fundings to renovate the buildings of social service providers, especially homeless service providers. And we also discussed that energy communities and especially community energy initiatives, which can be less bureaucratic, can be an option to involve the neighborhood to maybe invest in solar panels for homeless service providers' buildings, and then also to provide training for people using the services to then being capable of working in the energy efficiency sector and to participate also in the renovation of the shelters itself, which are highly inefficient, and the service providers spend a lot of their money on paying the bills instead of improving services or hiring more social workers. So this was the area where I worked more on energy communities. But I think in general, the issue again is quite similar with, in general, the access to the benefits of green technologies and energy efficiency, that you need to be well informed and you need to have some money apart to invest in an energy community to be a member of it, and also the capacity to organize yourself and to dedicate time to participation, which is often very limited for households that are living in extreme poverty, because most of their energy is spent on organizing the basics of life, which is more time consuming if your home is not in a good shape and everything is more difficult to access.
Thank you, Anna. I think from all the discussion that we had, also from the presentations and the panel discussion, we talked a little bit about initiative strategies, access to these fundings, and it's very clear that by streamlining access to these funding opportunities, the sources, or reducing bureaucratic hurdles in general, and focusing on including marginalized communities or just inclusive participation broadly, we can better support citizens. And I think this is a conclusion that is very clear from today's dialogue, but also from the work in Bolster. So I would like to sort of open up the panel again to a question more focused on collaboration. So we can move on to the next question. Thank you. How can international networks and local stakeholders work together to support marginalized communities in the energy transition process? And I would again open the discussion to all panelists.
Maybe I can add shortly that umbrella organizations like Fianța have a role in amplifying the communication between organizations that are working in the field and bringing their perspectives towards the EU institutions, and also facilitating the flow of information from the EU level, like talking about the new legislative elements that can be relevant for members. And I think in other areas, there are also other relevant umbrella organizations, but maybe energy poverty is still a topic that is not very well organized. So there isn't any, maybe except of the European Energy Poverty Advisory Hub, but it's a commission initiative and it's not the representation of local organizations working with energy poor households. So there isn't yet a framework of national organizations and their representation at the EU level. So probably there would be a space to strengthen also the representation of energy poor households locally, nationally, and then at an EU level. So I don't know if that was useful as a contribution to this discussion. But yes, a lot can be still done.
Thank you, Anna. I see there was a message in the chat from Linda. Maybe an option is to use the Marie Curie staff exchange to address the technical staff issue. Any reflections on this point? Yes, please, Nadia, go ahead. I know.
Very quick plug-in for me. I believe in this chain of communication and interaction, I think universities have a crucial role to play, because they're quite well positioned to connect between the existing international networks and the local stakeholders, being knowledgeable of the local stakeholders, as well as being credible and representative enough and knowledgeable enough on issues to interact with the international networks. There are quite a few international networks that can be very useful. For example, there is an association of the NGOs dealing with energy, which is quite a strong international network association. This will allow also to access information about new advancements, new technologies, and one would expect this from this kind of chain of communication, going from international networks to getting to local stakeholders. I believe that the practical benefit of it is having the most updated information in terms of best practice and what's going on. And one example I can give is that our university recently organized an international conference on energy communities. And we invited colleagues from Italy, from universities in Italy, to represent their best practice. And it seems that energy communities in Italy is so well developed that it's quite a common thing, and they have a lot of tips to share with us of how they got so advanced in the process and what kind of funding they access. So I think universities can be very important in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Perhaps I can invite Anna Maria to give any. Oh, Alexandru, please go ahead.
I can let Anna Maria if you want to, it's fine. I just wanted to underline a little bit that for marginalized communities in general, energy transition or energy is a side problem sometimes. So of course for us it's a big problem because there are big pockets, especially in marginalized communities, of energy poverty. But you have to understand as a social worker that you cannot force change into somebody who does not realize they have an issue. So first of all, you need to acknowledge and to to understand that marginalized communities have in Maslow's let's say pyramid, you sometimes need to have a holistic approach. So of course energy could be, of course, can be one of the solutions, because it actually, and it became one of the problems for them when the price of energy spiked. If you remember, I think during the beginning of the war in Ukraine, and the problem with electricity prices, it became much more, and it affected more the marginalized communities and the poor communities actually, because all of their, or most of their income was towards energy. But now I think it's very, very important to understand that energy communities could be are an instrument actually to help the marginalized communities. I don't think it's a solution to have members from the marginalized communities in the energy community. It can be, but I don't think it's the main purpose of the energy communities. But the energy communities, as designed at the local level, it can create actually two things. First of all, it's to give benefits and actually to be part of the holistic approach of the families in the marginalized communities, but together with other measures, social and economic measures, employability, things like this. I mean, you need to tackle everything. If you only tackle the energy poverty, you will just like, for example, you give vouchers for energy, that the people from marginalized communities don't pay the electricity anymore, let's say, or a very low price, but this does not solve the issue. So you need a holistic approach. As a social worker, case management actually requires a holistic event. And in the second thing, why I think energy communities is a good instrument actually to tackle energy poverty, is that it actually makes the members responsible, not only for producing green energy and everything, but also because it has a social dimension. And that means that we as a community, even if it's an energy community, we take care of the people which are in our community, even if they are not members, let's say, because it exceeds, you know, the term of community of the members, but it's community at the local level, and we should think as a family, from my point of view. And this is why we support very much that the framework for creating these energy communities, especially in Romania, allows actually for targeted measures towards the marginalized community, so that the members who have the capacity, because you don't need to and subsidize mostly the vulnerable ones, and those who have the power should create with their own means actually energy within the community, but also allows, juridically speaking, that the community itself should help the marginalized or vulnerable consumer, even if he is not a member of the energy community. So this is at least our approach, and I think it's very important to understand that it's a holistic thing in marginalized communities, and energy will not, solving the problem of energy in marginalized communities will not solve the problems of the marginalized community itself. That's just a social worker's perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandru. Please, Anna, go ahead.
Thank you, Alex. It was actually the idea that I was trying to stress earlier, this need for a more integrated approach, and looking at the more systemic problems that these communities face. But I think you said it in much better words, a lot more clear. Just to answer to this question, I think also conversations such as these are very valuable to get to know about different approaches and experiences that have already been experienced in other areas. So I'm really grateful for all the insights that we got from today. We're actually not experts in energy poverty or energy communities with MKBT, but we're very curious to learn about this and to see how we can better support these communities that we work in. So thank you, everybody, for all your contributions.
Thank you, Anna. I see Anna Bayomi also has her hand up.
So based on what Alex said on the role of energy communities, also involving and giving a kind of sense of responsibility for people living in vulnerable communities, I think they can also, from another perspective, is this individual burden of the energy transition, because if it's a community initiative, it may be easier or even cheaper to deliver the new technologies that are necessary for households to switch to cleaner energy sources, and also to produce their own electricity. And I think energy communities can also be very interesting in the future for the issue of heating that has already presented in the beginning of the presentation, that solid fuel use is a very big problem in these communities because it's polluting and it's also getting more and more expensive. And if municipalities can take an active role in planning community-based heating solutions, maybe in the form of district heating or geothermal energy or any kind of energy provision that can provide an alternative for these polluting and outdated, inefficient heating methods, it could really help the households to be included in the energy transition, because otherwise they risk to be left behind due to their lack of capacity to financial capacity and also technical capacity to individually invest in a heat pump and renovate their homes to make it heat pump ready. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Anna. I see we also have some messages in the group chat. There was an earlier question asking, given you also work with SMEs, is there any crossover between the European Innovation Council and Bolster? If anyone wants to address that question. But otherwise, I continue to look at, there are a lot of messages in the group chat. We also have a representative from the Energy Poverty Advisory Hub who has shared some links about the work that they do and what sort of technical support is available. And they have also shared a reflection to the Slido because they have no access. The international and local stakeholders represent different parts of the puzzle. From the European Poverty Advisory Hub side, we are very aware that the local stakeholders are a key interface to energy poor households. However, international networks and initiatives like IPA are vital to share experience, innovation, and connect experts and organizations to equip local stakeholders in the best possible way. And then there was also a reflection from Linda from Belgium when talking about projects working with marginalized communities. They are working through community sports involvement because there are some concerns in Belgium, and they find that outreach at the community level through a mechanism like sports, and we include sustainability in our outreach, is effective, but must be run by the community itself and at their preferred pace. And they use an approach called Youth Participatory Action Research. It's also very interesting. So this would be the final call if anyone has any reflections to make or any questions to ask in the group chat, If not, I would thank everyone for the engaging discussion today. Yes, thank you, Linda. So there is some potential for overlap between the EIC and the Bolster program, particularly in their shared goals of fostering innovation and addressing societal challenges, although they operate in different contexts and frameworks. Common goal, support for innovation. Yes, quite a long message. Thank you very much for this message. And As we are running a little bit late, I would ask maybe our panelists or some of the presenters to just make some final remarks, any final reflections that they would like to say regarding the discussion today. Please feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, maybe we can. So funding opportunities. While the EIC provides funding primarily for technological innovations and business development, Bolster's focus on community-driven research could align with EIC initiatives that seek to incorporate social dimensions into innovation strategies. Definitely a point for reflection for the Bolster team. Thank you very much. So as we wrap up, I really want to express my gratitude to everyone who participated, for your attention, for your engagement, for participating in the Slido, for answering all of the questions, for having very engaging questions yourself. As I mentioned, the recording of today's session will be available shortly on the Bolster and ECAS websites. We will also upload a little summary of what has been discussed, and we really hope to see you in our next policy dialogue. I wish everyone a very great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. You've been really great organizing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.